Bonjour, good morning everyone. Thank you for coming today. So last year on the day that we passed the 2024 budget, I warned Ottawa residents that the next budget, this year's budget, would be very challenging. I think at the media conference after the council meeting, there were as many questions about the 2025 budget as there were about the 2024 budget that we had just passed. And 1 week after we passed that budget, we had our first meeting about the next budget. So it's not news to say that we are entering into a tough budget process for 2025. My goal, as it has been since I took this job, is to strike the right balance. Mon objectif, depuis que je suis maire, a toujours été de trouver le bon équilibre. Il faut d'abord investir dans les programmes et les services dont nos résidents ont besoin. We must invest in the core programs and services that our residents rely on. We must invest in a strong local economy and in supporting the most vulnerable. And we must respect the cost pressures that our residents are facing. The higher cost of food, of housing, higher interest rates, and everything else, and not add to their burden with big tax increases. The challenges that we are facing are significant. Les défis financiers auxquels nous sommes confrontés sont considérables. I've spoken about them often over the past 9 or 10 months. I talked about them after the last budget passed. I talked about them at the first council meeting of the new year. I talked about them when we negotiated with the provincial government on the deal for Ottawa that was announced in March. I talked about them when I met with Prime Minister Trudeau in April. J'en ai parlé lors de ma rencontre avec le Premier ministre en avril. I talked about them when I raised the issues of PILTs and transit funding in August. Those challenges are reflected in the budget directions report that is being released today. Ces défis sont reflétés dans le rapport sur les orientations budgétaires qui sera publié aujourd'hui. And so is the balanced approach that I speak of, that I talked about in the election campaign 2 years ago. I made a commitment to the people of Ottawa in 2022 that I would keep tax increases as low as possible without cutting core programs and services. En 2022, je me suis engagé auprès des résidents d'Ottawa de maintenir les augmentations de taxes le plus bas possible sans réduire l'offre des programmes et services. The budget direction today includes a 2.9% increase for most areas of city operations. But the report also has a unique element to it. For the first time, there is a range of possible options for addressing the structural deficit that we are facing in our transit budget. There's a range of potential fare increases, a range of possible transit levy increases, a range of efficiencies and service reductions, and a range of contributions from other levels of government. The fact is, today, we don't know what the outcome will be from our negotiations with other levels of government. Depending on that outcome, we will need to apply different levers in order to close the transit gap. I remain optimistic. I remain hopeful that we will get the help we need. I've been having regular meetings and conversations with both levels of government over the past few weeks and even in the past few days. But if we don't, we will have no choice but to look at increasing the transit levy, increasing fares, and possibly reducing service. Je reste optimiste. Je pense que nous obtiendrons l'aide dont nous avons besoin. Mais si ce n'est pas le cas, nous n'aurons aucun autre choix que d'envisager une augmentation de la taxe sur le transport en commun, une augmentation des tarifs et une réduction des services. In the interest of transparency and clarity, the budget direction for transit is written with the full range of impact described for each individual option. I want the public to understand what a $120 million structural deficit represents. So, for example, the transit levy in the budget direction report has a range of 2.9% all the way up to 37%. 37% is the number required to cover the $120 million deficit using only the transit levy. The fare increase has a range of 2.5% all the way up to 75%. 75% is the number required to cover the $120 million deficit using only fares. If we were to apply some combination of all of the levers, the number would be lower in each area. Je veux que le public comprenne l'impact total dans chaque domaine. Je pense qu'il mérite de connaître toutes les informations disponibles. I want members of the public to understand the full impact in each area. I think they deserve to know all of this information. Let's be clear though, these are not things that we want to do, but there aren't a lot of other solutions left. Again, in the interest of transparency and clarity, I want to underline that the result of this budget direction is that we don't know yet what the total tax increase will be for 2025. The 2.9% direction is only for the parts of the budget that are not public transit. We may have to add to that number depending on how much other funding we receive and what levers we apply over the next few months. So if the transit levy increases, for example, the tax increase could be a little bit higher than 2.9%, or it could be a lot higher. I know there are already people saying, why don't you just impose big tax increases like other cities have done? I know from speaking with residents that this is not what they want, nor is it what they expect from us. Je sais, après avoir parlé avec de nombreux résidents, que cela n'est pas ce qu'ils veulent ni ce qu'ils attendent de nous. Les résidents d'Ottawa sont déjà confrontés à une augmentation des coûts dans de nombreux aspects de leur vie quotidienne. Ottawa residents are already dealing with rising costs in so many areas. I speak regularly with seniors on fixed incomes, with families who have rising mortgage costs and grocery costs, and with so many other residents who can't afford for us to add to their burden. De fortes augmentations de taxes pourraient nous aider à gérer notre budget, mais elles n'aideront pas nos résidents. Big tax increases might help with our budget, but it won't help our residents. And I was elected to protect the interests of our residents. It's simply not fair to pass the funding shortfalls of other levels of government on to our residents who are already paying more than their fair share. I don't think our residents want us to let the other levels of government off the hook for the shortfalls in transit funding and in payments of lieu of taxes. Je ne pense pas que nos résidents veuillent que nous laissons les autres niveaux de gouvernement se décharger de leurs responsabilités envers les déficits de financement des transports en commun et des paiements versés en remplacement d'impôts. The people advocating for big tax increases are basically saying it's okay for transit projects in the GTA to get 100% funding from other levels of government, while we, the residents of Ottawa, pay over half of the cost in Ottawa. They're saying it's okay for the federal government to decrease its property tax payments to us and keep shifting that burden onto residents. I don't think it's okay. I won't take the easy way out and add to the burden our residents are facing. A big tax increase certainly would not be the easy way out for our residents. Instead, over the coming weeks and months, we will continue to find savings and efficiencies as we have done for the past 2 years. We've saved more than $153 million in 2 years. That's the equivalent of a 7.5% tax increase on its own. For a property owner with a home assessed at roughly $500,000, that's a savings of about $400 per year. We will continue to fight for Ottawa's fair share. Nous continuerons à nous battre pour qu'Ottawa reçoive sa juste part. Je continuerai à rencontrer les responsables fédéraux et provinciaux pour plaider en faveur de l'aide dont nous avons besoin. I will continue to meet with federal and provincial officials to advocate for the support we need. I'm proud to have the support, unanimous support of City Council in advocating for that support. And we'll continue to work on the budget over the next 2 months so that when it's tabled in early November, we are delivering a solid plan for 2025 that protects core programs and services, including public transit, and that doesn't add enormously to the financial burden of our residents. The budget directions are just the beginning. Les orientations budgétaires ne sont qu'un début. There is lots of hard work ahead, and I will continue to bring a balanced approach to the budget. I will continue to defend the interests of Ottawa residents, and I will continue to fight for Ottawa's fair share. Thank you. Merci beaucoup. Happy to take your questions, and also with me are City Manager Wendy Stephanson and our Treasurer Cyril Rogers, if you have specific questions for them.
Good morning, bonjour. We will now take questions from the media. Nous allons maintenant répondre aux questions des médias. I will invite each agency in alphabetical order to ask their questions. You may ask one question with one follow-up. Par ordre alphabétique, j'invite chaque organisme à poser une question et une question de suivi. We'll start with, nous allons commencer par, Elise Skura, CBC.
Thanks very much. Is the microphone on? Yeah, probably. Thank you very much for taking your questions today. So you had mentioned that you wanted to be realistic by putting these very large margins of up to 37% of the levy, 75% potential increase in fares. But I mean, Mr. Rogers has already said that that's not something that on the table is doing this exclusively through one of these means. So is part of putting these very large numbers into this document kind of a pressure tactic for your negotiations with other levels of government?
I want to be clear and transparent to residents what the full impact of the $120 million structural deficit is in each of the areas that we're looking at, and I want to leave all of our options open. So I don't want to prejudge the work of the long-range financial planning working group on transit. My colleagues Jeff Leeper, Tim Tierney, Glenn Gower, and I are working together to discuss those different levers and the different options that were presented to City Council last week. I don't want to prejudge that work and say we're only going to go this far in one area and only go this far in another. So I think it's fair to share what the full range is in each area. Obviously, if we're confronted with a large deficit, we'll apply multiple levers at varying degrees to close the gap. It's not going to be solved with one lever or another. But I don't want to prejudge any of that work, so I'm demonstrating what the range of possibilities is in each area.
And in terms of the 2.9% increase, so that would be fully contingent on getting the money from the federal government and the provincial government that you need for transit. Otherwise, realistically, we are looking at a higher increase. Is that correct?
The 2.9% budget increase is for all areas of the budget except transit. If we don't receive the funding that we need from other levels of government, and if we choose to apply a higher than normal transit levy increase in the 2025 budget, then that would potentially add to the tax increase above 2.9%.
And sorry, in terms of the payment in lieu of taxes money, if we don't get the payment of lieu and taxes money, then 2.9% is still feasible?
Yes, so the money that, you know, to be clear, we're asking for help because we have a structural deficit in transit. If we receive help in other areas from other levels of government, we're very likely to apply those savings to public transit. So if, for example, the federal government were to give us some help on payments in lieu of taxes, we'd likely apply those savings, those revenues, to the structural deficit we're facing on the transit side.
Thanks very much.
Thank you. Next, we'll hear from Kate Porter, CBC Radio.
Hi, Kate.
Hi, thank you, Mayor. When I do some math, I think you're raising the specter of transit passes in the order of over $200, you know, hundreds more on the transit levy for people. Is that reasonable to ask or to even put out there for residents just 3 months ahead of a final budget vote? Or are you really in some ways just, I mean, she used pressure tactics, but playing chicken a bit here to get federal or provincial funding?
I'm simply portraying the reality of the budget situation right now. The fact is that if, you know, we have a $120 million structural deficit in our transit budget that is driven by a number of factors that are beyond our control, including reduced ridership. Our ridership is not at the level that it was in 2019. It's certainly well below 2019 levels and even further below the projected levels that we had for 2024 and 2025 when light rail was introduced in 2018 before the pandemic. So again, I'll remind people, Our objective for 2024 and 2025 was not that we'd be at 2019 levels, it's that we would be much higher than that. So we can't keep comparing ourselves to 2019, we have to compare ourselves to what we thought we were going to have as ridership in 2025. So we have a structural deficit because our ridership is down and because we don't get the same deal as other cities when it comes to capital projects for transit. So we're carrying big debt costs, debt servicing costs that other cities don't carry. Their light rail projects are paid for entirely by other levels of government. The Eglinton Crosstown, the Huron-Ontario line, and others. City dollars don't go towards those capital projects, so they have no interest payments, debt servicing payments associated with those. So if we don't get the help we need, we have to apply these other levers in some way or another, and I'm simply demonstrating what the full range of those levers will look like. I don't think we're going to reach the finish line and have a 37% transit levy increase or a 75% transit fare increase, but we are likely going to have to apply, if we don't get help from other levels of government, some combination of those levers in some form or another, and I'm simply sharing with residents and with councillors what the full spectrum is.
How are you preparing for the acrimony and fears of a budget process that this City Hall hasn't seen in some 10, 15 years?
We have a big hole in the budget. We haven't seen a $120 million structural deficit like this before. So people need to be engaged, people need to voice their opinions, and people need to join the advocacy that I'm doing with other levels of government. So if you don't want to see big transit cuts, if you don't want to see big fare increases, if you don't want to see a big increase in the transit levy that would result in a larger property tax increase, if those things are of concern to you, then make your voice heard, speak out about it, contact your MP, your MPP, regardless of what party they represent, reach out to provincial and federal officials and make your voice heard.
Thank you. Next, we'll hear from...
Oui,
En français?
seulement la dernière. Oui. Alors, nous ne voulons pas augmenter les impôts, les tarifs pour le transport en commun, ni les réductions des services. Nous ne voulons pas ça, mais alors si les résidents d'Ottawa ne veulent pas des augmentations fortes des impôts pour le transport en commun, les tarifs et les réductions de services, il faut qu'ils parlent avec leurs députés provinciaux et fédéraux. Il faut qu'ils parlent fortement et que les voix des résidents sont claires, que nous ne voulons pas qu'un déficit structurel dans nos budgets cause des augmentations des tarifs et des augmentations des impôts et des réductions de services. Alors, c'est important d'engager et de me joindre dans ma campagne pour qu'Ottawa reçoive sa juste part.
Merci. Next, we'll go to Austin Lee, CTV.
Hi, thank you. Morning. You mentioned the 2.9%. You said without some support from the province or from the federal government that it could be a little bit higher, it could be a lot higher. What kind of numbers are we talking about here? What is the range? Is it possible we see something like what we saw in Toronto last year, over 9%? What could Ottawa residents brace for?
It's theoretically possible that if we decide to cover the $120 million structural deficit entirely with a transit levy increase, that would be a 37% transit levy increase. That would represent something like a 7% tax increase on top of the 2.9%. So if that were the decision of council, that we cover the structural deficit entirely with a property tax increase, with a transit levy increase, then that's what we'd be looking at. I don't think that's where we're going to end up. I still remain hopeful that we're going to get help from other levels of government. And I think if we don't, or if we don't get as much help we need, we'll be applying multiple levers. But I want to be clear with residents that if we were to make it up entirely with a transit levy increase, that's what the cost would be to residents. I don't think that would be fair, but that's what it would be.
Okay, I did have another question about a tweet that you put out today regarding the Public Service Alliance of Canada and a message that they've been putting out to public servants on social media today. Can you explain your rationale behind the tweet and your thoughts?
I have the greatest respect for the public sector unions. I marched in the Labor Day parade a couple of weeks ago. I work very closely with the labor union representatives and leaders who serve the employees of the City of Ottawa. So I'm very respectful of the labor movement. I understand the disagreement that they have with the federal government, that the Public Service Alliance of Canada has with the federal government over the decision to have employees back in the office more frequently. I don't think they should throw small businesses in the downtown core into the line of fire in that dispute. So I was very disappointed to see PSAC encouraging their members to not spend money at downtown businesses. Downtown businesses have been struggling through the pandemic, and they've been suffering. Our downtown core needs to be vibrant, and I don't think that we should be discouraging people from shopping in downtown businesses because PSAC has a dispute with the federal government. They can sort that dispute out on their own. If they want to go after the federal government over that decision, that's their business. But I don't think they should throw small business owners in the downtown core into that dispute. And I encourage anybody who's downtown to support local businesses, to support the downtown economy, to support the vibrancy of downtown. We don't want to have a hollowed out downtown core where there are businesses struggling and stores being boarded up. We want a vibrant downtown core. That's in the best interests of everyone. So I hope the PSAC will reconsider this call to its members to not spend money downtown. I think that's punishing small businesses for a decision they disagree with that was made by the federal government.
Thank you.
Thank you. Maintenant, nous allons en Charles-Antoine Gagnon, le droit.
Bonjour.
Bonjour. Je voulais vous poser la même question en français. Là, mais
Au sujet de...
Oui, sur le syndicat, votre...
syndicat.
Oui, votre tweet.
Oui, PSAC en français, c'est quoi?
L'Alliance de la fonction publique du Canada, AFPC.
AFPC?
Ouais,
OK.
je pense que c'est ça.
Oui, OK. Alors, je suis désolé de voir cette message de AFPC parce que il y a un problème avec le gouvernement fédéral au sujet de la décision d'avoir les employés de la service public, les fonctionnaires au bureau 3 jours par semaine. C'est un problème avec le gouvernement fédéral. Ce n'est pas la responsabilité des petites entreprises au centre-ville. Ce n'est pas leur problème. Alors, je suis désolé de voir que l'AFPC dire à ses membres de ne pas dépenser de l'argent aux petites entreprises du centre-ville. Nous avons besoin d'un centre-ville vibrant, un centre-ville avec une croissance économique. Et les petites entreprises au centre-ville, c'était très difficile pour eux pendant la pandémie et pendant les années suivantes, pendant laquelle il y avait moins de personnes au centre-ville. Alors, si vous avez un problème avec le gouvernement fédéral, parlez avec le gouvernement fédéral. Ce n'est pas juste de lancer une attaque contre les petites entreprises au centre-ville.
Peut-être une question en parallèle avec celle-là. Est-ce que les employés municipaux, les cols blancs de la Ville d'Ottawa, sont tous au travail ou il y en a qui travaillent à la maison? Comment ça se passe actuellement ici?
Alors, la plupart des employés municipaux sont les employés comme les pompiers, les paramédicaux, les gens qui travaillent dans les centres communautaires, dans les bibliothèques, qui travaillent sur les rues, sur les autobus. Alors, pendant la pandémie, ils sont en place 5 jours par semaine. Alors, ce n'est pas la même chose. Typiquement, les employés du gouvernement fédéral travaillent dans les bureaux. Les employés municipaux travaillent en place sur les lignes et pas dans les bureaux. Mais pour les employés, c'est à peu près 15% des employés à l'hôtel de ville. Pour ces employés, c'est différent. Chaque département, c'est différent, mais je pense qu'ils sont au bureau c'est similaire de l'horaire des employés du gouvernement fédéral. C'est 2 ou 3 jours par semaine.
Puis rapidement, pour revenir sur le budget 2025, je pense que la ville de Gatineau demande aux gens qui ont des voitures de payer un certain montant sur l'immatriculation. Je pense que c'est 90 $. Est-ce que la ville d'Ottawa a ce pouvoir-là d'imposer ou de demander des frais sur l'immatriculation des voitures pour aider à payer le déficit en transport en commun?
Nous n'avons pas ce pouvoir à ce moment et ce n'est pas quelque chose que je veux faire. Nous voulons que plus de personnes viennent au centre-ville. L'objectif, c'est d'attirer plus de personnes au centre-ville. Je pense qu'il y a des autres solutions pour le transport en commun.
Merci. Next, we'll hear from Blair Crawford, Ottawa citizen.
Morning, Blair.
Good morning. So you've talked a lot about fairness, but one of the proposals, and I admit I haven't seen the document yet, but you're proposing that the cost of transit users will rise, increase fares, increase transit passes. And I'm just wondering, how fair is that they would be asked to potentially bear the burden for these transit deficits?
It's not fair at all. None of this is fair to our residents. It's incredibly unfair to our residents that they're paying more than their fair share because other levels of government have not contributed to Ottawa in the same way that they have to other cities. So we don't want to do that. I'll point out, though, that there will be people who will draw attention to the fact that City Council decided almost 20 years ago that fares should cover 55% of the cost of public transit, and right now fares are covering about 35% of the cost of public transit. So taxes are covering 65% when they were supposed to be covering 45%. So we're not meeting our objectives. We're already using tax dollars to subsidize the transit system beyond what was intended by council going back 20 years. I think that's all we can do at this point. But none of this is fair to our residents. It's not fair that a burden has been transferred to them. And that's why we need help from other levels of government, because we can't continue to shift that burden to our residents. We have to protect their interests. We have to respect the fact that they're already paying enough for public transit and they're already paying enough in their taxes, and other people aren't.
Second question then, you've talked, Minister Suds seemed to be cool to the idea of increasing PILT's payments to the city. I'm just wondering why you think that's still an open avenue for you to get more funding, and if you could update us on what's happened since then in negotiations with the federal and provincial governments.
I've had regular conversations with Jenna Suds and with other representatives of the federal government over the course of the last few weeks and the last few days. I spoke with Jenna Suds this morning from Nanaimo. She took an early morning call for me this morning, which I appreciated. So we're talking regularly. We'll continue to talk, and I remain hopeful. I never count on anything until it's a done deal. But I'm cautiously optimistic. I'm encouraged by what I'm hearing from the federal government and from the provincial government. The Premier Doug Ford has already said, if the federal government is in, then I'm in. So I remain optimistic, and I hope that we'll make some progress in the days and weeks ahead. Oui. Alors, je parle souvent avec le gouvernement fédéral et le gouvernement provincial. Le premier ministre Ford a déjà dit, si le gouvernement fédéral est là, je serai là. Et aussi, j'ai parlé souvent pendant les jours précédents avec ministre Suds. J'ai parlé avec elle ce matin. Et je suis toujours optimiste. Et je pense qu'il y aura une solution. J'espère qu'il y aura une solution. Et nous sommes prêts à travailler avec nos partenaires fédéraux et provinciaux pendant les jours suivants. Et j'espère qu'il y aura une solution très tôt.
Merci. Maintenant, nous allons à Rosalie Sinclair, Radio-Canada, le téléjournal.
Bonjour.
Bonjour. Donc,
Le budget, on vous a entendu en fait à plusieurs reprises demander au gouvernement de l'aide, entre autres pour le transport en commun. Le budget, vous allez le voter en décembre. En novembre, ça va vous être présenté de ce que vous disiez tantôt. Si on compte le nombre de semaines d'ici le mois de novembre, on est à 6 semaines. Vous dites que vous avez eu plusieurs discussions, mais est-ce que vous avez eu des engagements concrets de la part des élus avec qui vous avez parlé?
Est-ce que j'ai...
Est-ce que dans vos discussions, vous avez eu des engagements concrets de leur part qui vous ont dit oui, on va donner de l'argent?
Non. Si il y avait des engagements, je vais vous dire, mais les discussions sont productives, mais nous ne sommes pas à le point qu'il y a une décision, qu'il y a une annonce, qu'il y a un engagement. Alors, ce que j'ai entendu, c'est que le gouvernement fédéral et le gouvernement provincial sont prêts à travailler avec nous et qu'ils espèrent qu'il y aura une solution, mais je ne sais pas la solution encore.
Mais le temps presse quand même, non?
Oui, c'est urgent. Oui, nous devrons avoir une solution dans les semaines suivantes. Oui.
Puis, par rapport au transport en commun, on entend beaucoup de critiques là, de la part des citoyens sur la fiabilité du service, tant de trains, d'autobus, mais là, de leur dire en plus, on va peut-être réduire les services, augmenter les coûts pour les usagers. Quel message ça leur envoie? Vous pensez que les citoyens vont réagir comment si ce scénario-là se concrétise?
Encore une fois, il n'y a aucune autre solution. C'est seulement, nous ne pouvons pas avoir une déficit budgétaire. Les provinciaux et les fédéraux peuvent avoir des déficits. Je ne peux pas avoir un déficit. Alors, la solution, c'est très clair. C'est seulement une augmentation des impôts, une augmentation des tarifs ou une réduction des coûts. Ce sont les seules options. Alors, j'espère que ça n'arrive pas. J'espère que nous pouvons augmenter le service. J'espère que nous pouvons maintenir les tarifs le plus bas que possible et les impôts le plus bas que possible. Mais s'il n'y a pas des autres solutions, nous ne pouvons pas avoir une déficit.
Merci.
Yeah, look, I believe in public transit. I'm committed to public transit. Throughout my life, I've been a regular user of public transit. My family uses public transit. And I don't want to reduce service. I don't want to increase fares beyond a reasonable amount year over year. I don't want to increase taxes. But we don't have other solutions. We can't run a deficit. We're not allowed to. The federal and provincial governments are allowed to run deficits. We're not allowed to. It's really simple. If we don't get the funds we need to cover this structural deficit of $120 million, the solution will have to come from some combination of cost reductions or fare or tax increases. There's no other way.
Merci. Maintenant, nous allons à Maman Afou, Radio-Canada, ici Première.
Bonjour.
Bonjour, Monsieur le maire. Est-ce que le portrait que vous nous avez donné ce matin par rapport au service de transport, est-ce que ça en met encore plus en menace la phase 2 du train léger? Est-ce que, avec le déficit qu'on connaît en ce moment et la situation que vous décrivez ce matin, est-ce qu'on risque de voir la phase 2 encore plus mettre en pause pour les prochains mois?
J'espère que non. Alors, il y avait des autres villes qui ont parlé de prendre une pause avec leur nouveau projet de transport en commun, leur nouveau projet de train léger. Il y a beaucoup de coûts avec le lancement de phase 2. Mais j'espère que ce n'est pas une solution pour nous de prendre une pause avec le lancement de la phase 2. Alors, j'espère que non, mais naturellement, toutes les options sont là si c'est une décision du conseil municipal.
Par rapport à la taxe dont vous parliez ce matin, donc pour le budget, là, je sais qu'il y a des discussions qui vont arriver dans les prochaines semaines. Donc, ce que je comprends, c'est que vous souhaitez augmenter la taxe foncière de 2,9% pour cette année. Les années précédentes, c'était 2,5%, donc il y a une toute petite hausse. Mais est-ce qu'on risque de voir une diminution des services au cours de la prochaine année, vu que la Ville d'Ottawa est en déficit?
Non, veut protéger les services et les programmes de la Ville d'Ottawa. Et c'est important de souligner que nous avons trouvé des efficaces de 153 millions de dollars dans les 2 années précédentes. Ça, c'est l'équivalent d'une augmentation des impôts de 7,5%. Alors, sans ces efficaces, il y aura une augmentation des impôts de 10,4%. Ça, ce n'est pas ce que je veux faire. Ça, ce n'est pas que le Conseil veut faire. Alors, nous avons trouvé les efficaces et le résultat, c'est que nous pouvons protéger les programmes et services avec une augmentation des impôts moins des autres villes.
Parfait, merci.
Merci. Yeah. Yeah, I think it's important to remind people that we found savings over the last 2 years of $153 million in the budget, savings and efficiencies, without impacting core programs and services. And that's the equivalent of a 7.5% tax increase. So if we hadn't done that, we'd be looking at a 10.4% tax increase for this year. Instead, because of that hard work that's been done by the team at the City of Ottawa and the Service Review Working Group, of which I'm a member, along with Councillors Carr and Curry, we've been able to reduce that possible tax increase from the range of 10.4% down to 2.9% this year. So we're able to have a very low tax increase while still protecting the core programs and services that our residents rely upon.
Merci. Next, we'll hear from Charlie Senak, Kitchissippi Times.
I don't see Charlie here, but
No, Charlie? Then this concludes today's media availability. Ceci conclut le point de presse d'aujourd'hui. Thank you, merci.
merci beaucoup. Thank you.